by that, just to clarify a little bit. We always assume that social action and politics is progressive and liberative. We talk about it in that sense. But every time the, is it working? Every time we speak of divorcing ourselves from faith, we never really talk about divorcing the faith from politics that supports the status quo. Because we assume that that's not political. We assume that that's not some form of social action. Well, social action in the positive sense means fighting for the poor, but there's social action that's taking place that's supporting the system in which we live in. So starting from that perspective, that every time you profess to have a faith, that faith is intimately tied to some type of belief system about the world and some type of action that you're taking, whether you deny it or not, we need to first start there. And I think when I speak of the decolonization of Puerto Rican theology, I think one of the things I'm referring to is that we need to begin, as a colonial people, to begin to undo all the internalized racism that exists in our bodies, that lead us to believe that everything that comes from the outside is better than what we can produce. So as a student of the evangelical and Pentecostal movement, especially among Latinos, I want to share some observations about how it is time that we, to a certain extent, divorce ourselves from the importation of evangelical and Pentecostal traditions that come from the outside, which have agendas which are not the agendas that we should be having, because the agenda perpetrated by right-wing or even liberal white evangelicals is not the one that pertains to us. That's the agenda that pertains to their faith and their social action and their political reality. Let me just give you a few examples of what I see as the process that takes place among Latinos, at least in New York City. And I think it might be happening here in Puerto Rico also, from what I see. When you read and you look at the theology, basic theology of the evangelical and Pentecostal movement of Hispanics, most of the authors they're reading are authors from outside the community. Now, there was a time that we had no choice but to do that because of the oppressive system. We know that many of us didn't have access to higher learning into seminaries. But I would suggest to you that at this time we have enough writers within the community that we can look to and help us ground our theology within the theologies that are being produced. I noticed that in New York City, even the progressive Latino evangelicals, they love to read people like Ron Steiner, Jim Wallace, good men, but men who don't have concerns or interest in what's happening to the Latino and black communities. They say they do, and on occasion, they even take up courses that pertain to us, but they usually take up the cause when it is beneficial to stay relevant as a movement. It's not for moral reasons, it's to stay relevant within the situation. When they feel that they're losing Hispanic and black evangelicals, then they try to respond to some of those issues. And I always tell my Latino brothers and sisters in New York City that are from this brand of evangelicalism, that if you look at the issues that Latinos have co-opted as major concerns for themselves, they're really not. And let's look at a few that are controversial. Homosexuality. White evangelicals have been obsessed with that issue. Hispanic evangelicals and sometimes African American evangelicals have co-opted those ideas and concerns which really are not of much concern to us, I would suggest. We can debate that later. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't think about issues of sexuality, but that's not what's destroying our communities in urban centers throughout the United States. Poverty is, racism, lack of good education, Abortion is the other hot topic issue. How did that issue end up as a major issue within the Latino evangelical and Pentecostal churches? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the fact that we really need to be more concerned about the living than those who are not alive yet? That's an issue that is of more interest and of more concern to white evangelicals. I would even suggest, and I say this with all sincerity, although it might sound harsh, that a lot of people who are obsessed with abortions, I sometimes have suspected if they just want more children to be born so they can send them off to prison, and maybe eventually have more people to execute in prison. Another issue that really has no real substance for us is this obsession with teaching religion in schools. Teaching religion in schools. Maybe that would be important, although I have the view that there should be separation of church and state. We have enough places where we can teach our children the faith. But those are issues that are rooted in a particular historical moment in the United States, where fundamentalists were feeling threatened by liberal Christianity, and they started debating this issue that has existed for a long time, and it's an issue that is really not that relevant to Latino evangelicals, but we have also just taken it on and co-opted it for ourselves. So, what I'm suggesting this afternoon and at this moment is that we begin to reflect on how we decolonize our theology and start asking the pertinent questions for us today. I mean, rather than dealing with the issue of abortion or homosexuality, why are we dealing with the issue of colonization and the destruction that that has caused upon the people of Puerto Rico? Why are we dealing with internalized racism and racism, how it manifests here in the society of Puerto Rico? There are many more interesting questions that we could be asking, and I think that's where we need to begin to some extent in reevaluating where we're going with the church.